It's Hawaii Matters, a Pacific Media Group community program, and my name is Kathy with a K, your host. We are going to be talking about COPD, what it is, how to find support, and more. Our guests are Valerie Chang, co-executive director, founder of the Hawaii COPD Coalition. Before retirement, she was also a part-time district court judge in Honolulu. We also have Pamela McMillan, retired respiratory therapist with over 30 years of experience working at medical centers in California and Hawaii. Welcome. Off the top, what is COPD? Pam McMillan for that.
So the letters COPD stand for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So chronic meaning that it just didn't happen, last week. We didn't just get a cold and it lasted a couple weeks. It's chronic. It's been going on for a long time. Obstructive meaning that air is obstructed in your lung, and we'll talk about this more on the way out. So there's an obstructive flow of air as we exhale. Pulmonary meaning it's in our lungs. Disease, meaning, yes, this is a problem for us. So COPD is the acronym for chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And that's what it is.
Pamela, is it a COPD, is it a relatively new acronym on the scene because nowadays, there's so many commercials about, talk to your doctor if you have a COPD conditions, et cetera.
Really, it's an umbrella term, I would say, Val, for multiple things, for asthma, emphysema, chronic bronchitis. These are all things that cause obstruction in the lung and could be chronic. They could asthma can be acute and chronic, but COPD is really an umbrella term that encompasses different processes in the lung.
And in other countries, it might be called COLD, chronic obstructive lung disease, because pulmonary is a word that not everyone is familiar with. And so in Europe, for example, they do call it COLD.
You just heard from Valerie Chang, and before her, Pam McMillan. We're talking COPD, Hawaii Matters. I'm your host, Kathy with a K. When someone is given a diagnosis of COPD, you have to go to a doctor to get that proper diagnosis. There's a lot of patient might not think to ask in the moment. So thank you to Valerie for sharing a most asked list, air quotes around that. Can you and Pamela talk more on these one by one?
Sure. For example, for me, the reason I got checked out was I was lagging further and further behind when I hiked with my family and friends, and I was waking up every night breathless. Some people have different symptoms, and some people claim they don't notice any difference, but the reason they don't is because they stop doing things that make them breathless. So they say, I'm not breathless, but they start walking shorter and shorter distances, and they make people do errands for them because they're too breathless and they don't want to be breathless. Mm-hmm. So any doctor can order the lung test, which is called the pulmonary function lung test. And Pam can talk a lot of detail about that since that's what she's been doing for decades. They use that and your medical history and some imaging of your lungs to help figure out whether it's COPD or whether it might be something else. And Pam can talk more about the lung test. 20 to 25% of people have never smoked or had necessarily some sort of exposure to secondhand smoke. But many of them have had some environmental exposure, like the wildfire smoke or some occupational exposure. Mm-hmm. I've seen 13 lung doctors. I have not had any of those exposures. So they were really reluctant to even send me for testing. My internist, who has seen me for decades, said, it's a waste of time and money, but I can refer you for a lung test. And so he did. He referred me to for a lung test at the medical center because he didn't do that particular type of test in his office, although some doctors now do. And any doctor, you don't have to be a specialist to refer for the lung test because it's non-invasive, it doesn't hurt, and you just follow the instructions of whoever's administering the test. It's pretty straightforward. It can take very short time, like 15 minutes, half an hour, or it can take hours, depending on how difficult or easy it is for the patient to follow the instructions. If they're having a hard time breathing, they might have a lot more trouble following instructions. Or some of them, when they start having dementia, they just really can't follow instructions. Toward the end, my father, who had chronic bronchitis, could not follow instructions, so they couldn't get a good test on him. But that is not very common. Usually with patients, people like Pam, respiratory therapists, are able to coax people to do a good lung test.
I was going to say, yeah, Val is an unusual case of COPD in that she did not have these exposures to smoking. She did not have any pre-existing reason that she would have this obstructive lung disease. Other people may, you were asking when did you discover it? I think anytime your family does discover that you are more breathless or you are, coughing unusually or you are waking in the night feeling breathless, this is not normal and you should be seen. And I think as an RT, as a respiratory therapist, what was sad to me, because I saw it over and over again, was that people waited a long time. They were in denial, especially people who are smoking, because it's something that we don't want to give up. We just don't want to give up, but we know it's hurting us. And when it leads to symptoms that are so severe, maybe you got a cold on top of COPD and you ended up in the emergency department. Sadly, this is when some patients will start to pay attention to their lungs, is when, they have had a trip to the hospital and they've had a crisis. And what we're trying to do with the COPD Coalition is educate people so that we don't wait too long, so that you notice that, if you can't breathe or you hear wheezing, this is a sound of obstruction in the lung. This is not normal, and have someone check it out because we can help. We can turn some of these things around with medicine.
And that's one of the reasons we're having speakers on our education day, because there are really exciting new treatments that have come out in the last few years. There were no new treatments for a very long time, almost 20 years, and all of a sudden there are some new treatments that are really making a difference in people's lives. Like, for example, I used to get infections, 1 to 6 infections every year for the past 20 years, until my doctor said, that's enough. We need to do better for you. And I was already taking all the inhalers they wanted me to take, and I was taking them regularly. But there is 2 new medicines that were recently approved. They're called biologics, and they require injections. And if you meet the criteria and you're an appropriate candidate, your doctor can recommend them for you, and you can try them and see if they work. And for me, it's been a new world. I have not had infections in over 2 years, which is a record. The only other time I didn't have infections was during COVID when I was a hermit, but that's not a lifestyle I advocate.
I would attribute the new biologics to, honestly, I think they saved the life of one of my patients that had asthma on top of another problem in his lung. And he also attributes this one of these new medicines, because I really thought that this person that was in his 40s was going to die. And it really turned his life around. But you've got to see a doctor in order to, have these things evaluated, measured, and especially with, as we will get into later, the lung testing differentiates, which direction the doctor wants to go in.
This is Hawaii Matters. I am your host, Kathy with a K. We just heard from Pam McMillan, a retired respiratory therapist with over 30 years of experience working at various medical centers in California and in Hawaii. And also Valerie Chang, founder of the Hawaii COPD Coalition. We're learning about COPD, and one thing to keep in mind just very generally, when you are feeling healthy and robust, you're getting your sleep, it's just relatively pain-free, it's great. When we're talking about COPD, something about the shortness of breath, and when Valerie was speaking on, there was a period of getting infections 1 to 6 times a year, when you're not able to have that full inhale and full exhale, the overall taxing it does on the different parts of your body and affecting your sleep and then your appetite and your activity, it can snowball. And so this is why understanding what COPD is, what it could be, it might be more than asthma. Maybe the current treatment that you had in your teen years is different now that you're in your 30s or after becoming a parent, a new job. There's so many different factors. So thank you for coming in and talking about COPD. Valerie, you had something to point out?
One of the other problems about people not wanting to bring this up with their physician is there's a lot of shame and blame. A lot of people think they did it to themselves because they were smokers or they were exposed to secondhand smoke. But really, there is no place for that. I mean, if you are a smoker or around a smoker, there is help. Mm-hmm. There is 1-800-QUIT-NOW. It's available throughout the U.S. and it's free. And they will talk to you. And if you want to speak to a Hawaii Quit Line person, they will refer you to a Hawaii Quit Line person, especially if you call during hours where Hawaii Quit Line people are more likely to be working. Mm-hmm. And then they will help tell you what programs are available in and around your area. And they can offer a lot of support if that is something that is of interest.
Valerie Chang, you brought up a really good point about people who may be former smokers or just former
vapors
and those kinds of things. When somebody has a COPD diagnosis, can it be reversed?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
Who would like to
talk about that?
So again, Pam McMillan, a retired respiratory therapist.
We can see in some patients an improvement in that obstruction with certain medications, and that's why we would need to test you in the lab and evaluate that. And certainly a pulmonary doctor would look at your overall health because we would look at your circulation also. We wouldn't want your lungs to get so much obstruction that you would get a secondary problem with your circulation in your lung, which can happen if COPD lasts for a long time. It can lead to other circulatory problems within the blood flow of your lung. And so that's why it's kind of important to get a diagnosis early so the doctors can get a hold of the COPD and try to help you. The drugs that are given, that we give to asthma patients, we see an asthma patient that obstruction will improve after we give them some of these medicines. When this obstruction becomes chronic, treating your lung with medications becomes a little bit more complex, and we have to add different medicines sometimes rather than just the one inhaler to open up and diminish obstruction. And we are having an education day that's free and September 4th, that will talk about some of these new treatments and more advanced treatments to relieve obstruction in the lung. When the lung can't exhale air, you keep taking a breath in, and every breath you take, you can't get some of that air out. it leads to trapped air in the lung, which makes you feel like you can't breathe because your chest is already full of some air that can't get out. And this is why we need to bring a patient into the lab to see what the level of that obstruction is, and whether the doctors can help.
And one other thing is if you have other conditions, like if you have gastric reflux, that can also worsen your lung function. So if you optimally treat it, that can help reduce the problems and help possibly improve your breathing if it's causing problems. And then allergies as well are another trigger for some people.
There's a concomitant or altogether a storm of events can be created in your throat if mucus drips down from the back of your nose or gastric fluids come up from your gut and create a little storm in your throat. You're going to be miserable on top of being short of breath. So doctors address this, and a primary care doctor can see you for shortness of breath, and they can evaluate and do very simple lung testing. Further lung testing would go to a specialist.
You just heard from Pamela McMillan, retired respiratory therapist, and a bit from Valerie Chang, founder of the Hawaii COPD Coalition. This is Hawaii Matters. I'm your host, Kathy with a K. With COPD, it's fascinating. I mean, just understanding that it's that sensation, and if you are listening and have experienced that, or you have a loved one who has mentioned that kind of hard to describe shortness of breath, very specifically, make that appointment with a doctor, get some details. Again, let's go back and check out these further inquiries, maybe before you're diagnosed with COPD or maybe newly diagnosed, because when you get that kind of diagnosis, you leave the doctor's office with a pamphlet or a link to a website, and it's like, but wait, there's more. So let's go through these questions, and let's just see, and Valerie or Pamela can, take the lead on it. First off, can a patient with COPD have a normal life? Valerie?
Well, most people would say I lead a very normal life. I had to give up a few things. I had to give up swimming because that made me desaturate from mid-90s to 70 when I swam. And it gave me a splitting headache. And I could have tried putting the oxygen concentrator, supplemental oxygen, by the side of the pool. But the problem is I get hives now from swimming anyway. So all in all, I said, well, that is one thing I'm willing to give up. If you do make modifications and pace yourself, you can live a pretty amazing life. I work closely with my healthcare team, and I just came back from traveling for a month. I went to New York and Scandinavia and Tokyo. So people can do things. I had another patient that's going to be speaking with me at our Education Day on September 4th. He traveled on a cruise for 140 days. So we are doing things. We are not staying home and being hermits. You just have to work closely with your medical team and figure out how to pace yourself. And you might have to think of when you have the most energy and do things accordingly. Like when you have more energy, you do the things that require more energy. And maybe you put a few things off for another day instead of trying to be super person and doing everything one time, one day. Pam?
I would say that patients, certainly when you have a hard time with your breath, you're not going to be able to keep up with your friends if they climb Mount Everest. I mean, your life will change. That is going to be a given. But I think with a medical team following you and educating yourself about what COPD is, you can lead a fairly normal life for a long time, and especially if you don't allow it to progress and get any worse. Now, smokers, it's hard. that's the hard person that doesn't, you don't want to give it up. You don't want to give it up. You don't want to give it up. It's okay. You know, we will try to help you. There's no judgment. Just come in and be seen and be evaluated so that the doctors can at least find out the degree of severity. Maybe people already know, I can't keep up with the family, I can't, and they've already sort of, as Val mentioned, there's some shame in coming and admitting, you know, yeah, I've smoked for 30 years. I did it to myself. I've had, you know, patients say that, or they don't want any part of the medical, you know, team helping them. They want to go ahead and just do what they want. But you can be helped, and we just want to measure the degree of severity. And sometimes you wonder, how did I get so out of breath? Because I never smoked. You know, there are instances where people have a low something called antitrypsin, and if you are lacking in that, you can develop COPD in what we call an idiopathic way. It just came up within our body, and we don't know why that was, because I didn't get exposed. It just happened. My DNA twisted in a certain way that I got this thing called COPD, and that's a blood test that we do in the hospital. So Val has been down that pathway because she was never a smoker. And, you know, I have had even patients that they smoke marijuana. They don't want to give that up. I've seen doctors that don't have a problem. You know, so much judgment out there about what you do. The pulmonologist might not have a judgment about that. They just might want you to eat a gummy and not smoke it because, you know, the RTs in pulmonology, we would like you to cut back on the smoking. With different breathing techniques too, and we're going to go over that on our Ed Day. You know, I always tell my patients it's so important to come into your exhale, make your exhale long so that you can, you know, slow down and do things with people. And that's an educating process with physical therapists and the medical team.
You just heard from our guest, Pamela McMillan, a retired respiratory therapist, as well as Valerie Chang, co-executive director, founder of the Hawaii COPD Coalition, established in 2007. Valerie Chang was diagnosed with COPD, a unique diagnosis, and is living a full life. There are certain sports and activities she has resisted, and this adds to her overall quality of life. This is Hawaii Matters. I'm your host, Kathy with a K. The 20th annual COPD Education Day is on Friday, September 4th, 2026, from 9 to 2 p.m., 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Queens Conference Center. And for those who are interested in becoming informed, just discovering how maybe they can help a loved one help themselves by arming themselves with education tools, the more you can know about what COPD is, and you could probably help other people because, like you've been hearing, some folks, no shame, get informed about it, the COPD Education
power.
Day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people in Hawaii for a long time. They've been borrowing their auntie's inhaler. Oh, I just borrowed auntie's inhaler. Oh, no, I just borrowed auntie's inhaler. Or I borrowed my kid's inhaler. But really, there's something else going on in your lung. And it wasn't asthma. And the inhaler isn't, it was something else called interstitial lung disease. That's why we need a lung test.
Yeah, and the right treatment really makes a difference. And the earlier you can get treated and get properly diagnosed, the better it is for everyone. Knowledge is power. I mean, if you don't know what you're treating, then, you know, you might as well just, you know, randomly open a medical book and say, this is what I'm going to be treating today.
And especially, we're going to address that on our Ed Day. We don't want to be getting bad medical information from our social media. either. We want to,
or even just people at the dog park. We really want people to be able to sift through. There's so much medical information out there. So that's why we asked a medical librarian to come and talk to us. She's from the John A. Burns School of Medicine, and that is what she does to high school students and med students. And everybody could use a few tips on how to better assess what is good and accurate medical information. And that's why we're really excited that Carolyn Dennison has agreed to be our speaker.
Hawaii is a unique state in that I think we do practice rural medicine here. Like we have to go out to the outer islands to outreach, some of these patients. I myself have had to work not just on this island, but other islands. And the further out we get to the islands, the more difficult it is for those patients to come in and to be seen. And maybe they're going to borrow their auntie's inhaler and just go with that for a while because of bad information they've been given. In a primary care doctor's office, they will have a simple testing tool in most offices, not a full lung test, but you can at least get a screening test done in a primary care doctor's office, even if that's way out on the Big Island. We do encourage, our Ed Day is free. The Hawaii COPD Foundation is a part of a broader national foundation, and there is a lot of free educational information out there for people in Hawaii.
Yes, and we do give a lot of resources, and there's a lot on our website, hawaiicopd.org, and people can go on and just lurk and see what they find that is of interest and helpful.
A lot of times you're nervous in a doctor's office appointment. You only have 30 minutes with that doctor. I always encourage the patients to write down their questions for the doctor because when you leave, you forgot to ask him something. And those are the questions that could be answered on the COPD website. What are they listening to when they listen to my lungs? What are they looking for? And what is obstruction? When you talk about obstruction in COPD, you think it's getting air in when I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't get air in. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease really has to do with how you're getting your air out, which is really hard to fathom. But that's why you would hear something called wheezing, the squeaking sound, on your exhalation. Asthma patients do this a lot, but asthma can be chronic, but it's usually an acute problem that happened suddenly, and the muscles had a muscle spasm in the lung, and it caused that air to be squeaking and making the sound as you exhale. Well, COPD is similar, but it's a chronic condition. It has a lot of mucus clearance problems and things that are associated. So that's why an overall, trip to see someone and not trying to guess, at your own health is a good thing.
You just heard from Pamela McMillan, retired respiratory therapist. We also have Valerie Chang of the Hawaii COPD Coalition. Again, Hawaii Matters, talking COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, aka COPD. I'm Kathy with a K, your host with Hawaii Matters. Why is COPD hard to diagnose?
It's not necessarily hard to diagnose. It's just that people don't necessarily ask their doctors, and their doctors don't necessarily ask the patients, because only 20% or so of smokers end up with COPD. And that comprises about 75% of the people that end up with COPD, but a lot of smokers don't get it. Either they die before they would get it, or they just never get diagnosed. Or there is definitely some genetic component that makes some people more predisposed to have lung problems than others. But once you get the lung test and you get the imaging and you get the medical history, I believe it's pretty straightforward to get a proper diagnosis. It's just, I don't understand why there's shame and blame, because people are not blamed for having diabetes. They're not blamed for having high blood pressure. They're not blamed for any number of things, even breaking bones. They're not blamed for that. They just say, well, it was an accident or something that happened. But people really feel bad and feel blame and shame about asking about, why am I breathless?
Well, also, like the patients sometimes I've seen are patients that just absolutely did not want to give up their lifestyle of smoking, and they just didn't want to do it. And they ended up in the emergency department. They were headed that way. Their wife saw them getting more and more out of breath, more and more overweight, let's say. There were comorbidities galore in Hawaii. Possibly it was the point where they just took it out to an incident, and they ended up in the emergency room, and they were told, they were probably told they had COPD just by the doctor, just based on their history and their years of smoking. And then reluctantly, they end up, in the healthcare system. And in some cases, it's a little late. Like, we would like to catch it a little early and get your lungs under control so that you don't get that secondary problem of something called secondary pulmonary hypertension, which is getting into some detail in the lung. But like, sometimes if the lung is getting a chronic condition, it's going to get another problem, which is that your blood won't circulate and pick up oxygen as well. So we really like to get someone in early so that we can make sure that you're going to have the best life that you can for the rest of your life with your grandkids.
If you have more questions and maybe or you've been looking for a support group in relation to a new diagnosis of COPD, you can go to hawaiicopd.org. Their 20 Years of Better Breathing, the theme for the Education Day on Friday, September 4th, 2026. Hawaii COPD Coalition is for those diagnosed with COPD for support and more for their families. Thank you, Valerie Chang, Pamela McMillan, and the Hawaii COPD Coalition. Links can be found in this episode's notes. To share or replay, please search Hawaii Matters where you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and this station's website. For Pacific Media Group, I'm Kathy with a K. Mahalo.
Make sure that students, healthcare students especially, are welcome to come. Okay.
Look forward to. So it's the 20th annual COPD Education Day. It's been 20 years.
Been 20 years.
Yeah,
20 years of hard work of Val and dedication to the community.
It's a culmination.
We keep doing it every year, and Queens has been a good partner. Yes.
Friday, September 4th, 2026, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Again, Queens Conference Center.
And it's also on Zoom. Those are that are remote. But we prefer people to be able to come in because there's going to be hands-on demos, especially how to use inhalers. So many people use them incorrectly. Yeah. And so we want people to learn to use them properly. Otherwise, they're wasting a good portion of their medicine, and then they don't know why they're not feeling better.
Okay.
And the physical therapists are wonderful
awesome.
that they actually have breathing exercises.
Yeah.
I only could hit on it very briefly with my patients. I had time limits, but
it's like 5 or 15 minutes that they have for.
They have so many exercises that I didn't even know about, and just simply, teaching them one, which is purse lip exhale, is something I would do all the time. But they're going to have a lot more techniques in the ed day.
And if you want to tell people what it feels like, it's called stacked breathing. Is you take a big breath in, and then only breathe out half your air, and then take another big breath, and see how you do that.
Oh,
that feels awful.
Yeah.
That's what we do all the time.
People with COPD, it's just not.
You can't empty it. So you're taking in a big breath, and then you're emptying out, half, because that's all you can empty. And then you're trying to take another breath and there's no room to take the next
Your
breath.
capacity to breathe is diminished. So that's exactly what we would look at in a lung test study is the distribution of the volumes in the lung. So there's a volume of air that you would never exhale called residual volume, which is very diagnostic to the doctors. And that's like, because we can blow out we think we've blown out all our air, but we haven't.
Otherwise, your air would,
your lung
lungs
would be like a
collapse.
sponge,
Yeah,
and
you
there's
can't
always some
collapse,
water
yeah.
in a sponge. But like your volume, residual volume in your lung is what's diagnostic. So if you have an increased residual volume that you can't exhale, that's the thing that makes it uncomfortable to breathe, because your vital capacity, your breath that you use every day on a working basis is only this much, because there's so much air inside your chest already. And emphysema patients have barrel chests, because emphysema is a we didn't get into the specifics of COPD, but like that is a type of COPD where the air sac is all stretched out. It loses elasticity and you can't exhale your air. The normal lung has a balloon sac inside and it has elastance like a balloon does. But emphysema lung loses that elastance, so the balloon is all wabby and it doesn't deflate. And so those patients are very breathless and what we say barrel-chested. And definitely, we want to help these people.
For those diagnosed with COPD, it's is it painful, or is it more of like it's a mental kind of it's troubling because you know that I'm inhaling, I'm exhaling, and it's another kind of stress.
Anxiety.
The thing that is terrible
Yes.
is most of us think when you're told you have emphysema, you're going to die. In fact, they told me I was going to die shortly. And that's wrong on so many levels. And 26 years later, it's really wrong. But, that's the problem is everyone thinks it's a death sentence. They still do. And they think once you put on oxygen, that's a death sentence too. And then you're double death sentence. But
in fact, any patient that's just been diagnosed with whether your doctor says it's COPD, it's interstitial lung disease, it's cancer, they aren't going to hear anything a clinician says for the next 45 minutes. They're just not going to process
you're just
it.
kind of hysterical. I could not drive for
I've had patients in
an hour
the
or
lab
two. Yeah, you're
right
just
after
upset.
they get a diagnosis and they've told me on their second visit, you were trying to talk to me while I was trying to process something.
And they don't give you any papers. They don't give you any resources. They just tell you, see you in 6 months or a year or in the ER. And
Which
then
is why
go away. I'm like,
there's a National COPD Coalition, and there's also the Hawaii State Coalition for COPD, and Val's been very much an advocate for all of the patients in Hawaii.
yeah, because I was devastated. I literally could not drive. I said, because I wasn't expecting it. I was told.
She didn't smoke.
I thought I just had asthma and they would give me an inhaler. I'd be on my way. And they said, no, you're really doing quite awful. You need to go see a specialist. So I went to go talk to my brother-in-law because he's a doctor. He was working in the building. I said, I can't drive. I'm so upset.
The lung inside does not have nerve, is not an innervated organ, so to speak, so that inside the lung you don't feel pain. The pleural sac that the lung sits in, a fluid sac, has a lot of innervation, and it's very painful if you have to have a chest tube, for example, or you had something called pleurisy. It's almost a way to just, do you have a really bad pain when you cough or you take a big breath in at the peak of your inhalation? That may be a diagnostic thing for the doctor because your pleuritic space has a lot of innervation. Your chest wall, has a lot of the lung inside. So during COPD and experiencing COPD, pain, I wouldn't say pain.
Unless
I would
you
say a
have
lot
the
of anxiety.
Muscles. They could have the muscles. If you're trying really hard to breathe and you're taking a lot of breaths, your intercostal muscles can get sore.
And the diaphragm definitely is usually a C-shaped muscle that is high, and sometimes it flattens out when
Yeah,
the
for us,
patients are.
with COPD, it's flat.
It has no C shape; it flattens out, and that because of the air that is obstructed and not getting out of the lung, and that creates a huge anxiety for the patient, which is a mental pain. It's not. We have seen. Often we see patients with anxiety too that are trying to sort out whether they have a real problem.